Florida homeowners could be voting on whether to eliminate property taxes by November. As the 2026 legislative session moves past its halfway point, 3 constitutional amendments have already cleared House committees and are heading to the full floor for a vote. The most aggressive proposal would wipe out up to $18.3 billion in local government revenue overnight. Governor Ron DeSantis has called the proposals not serious. House Speaker Daniel Perez has fired back. The Senate has not committed to any plan, and local governments across the state are warning that police, fire services, and infrastructure could be at risk. This is the biggest tax fight in Florida in decades, and most homeowners still have no idea what is actually being proposed or how it would affect them. According to legislative records and fiscal analyses from the Florida Revenue Estimating Conference, the stakes are enormous. Here is what you need to know. The story begins in early 2025 when Governor DeSantis announced his intention to eliminate property taxes on homesteaded properties in Florida. A homesteaded property is a primary residence where the owner lives and has filed for a homestead exemption under Florida law. Approximately 5.1 million properties in the state carry this designation, according to the Florida Department of Revenue. DeSantis framed the proposal as a matter of affordability, arguing that Floridians who have paid off their mortgages should not have to continue paying what he described as rent to the government in perpetuity. His position was that the state could backfill lost revenue for rural counties that cannot absorb the cuts, and that local governments could find savings by reducing what he characterized as excessive spending. However, the governor did not release a detailed plan. When the legislature approved $1 million in the 2025 budget for a comprehensive study on the impact of eliminating property taxes, DeSantis vetoed it. He argued that a study was unnecessary. The Florida House moved ahead on its own. In October 2025, House Speaker Daniel Perez directed a specially appointed Select Committee on Property Taxes to develop proposals. The committee, chaired by Representative Toby Overdorf of Palm City, held hearings throughout the fall and received testimony from homeowners, local government officials, business groups, and fiscal analysts. The result was a package of 7 proposed constitutional amendments and 1 statutory bill, filed in the House during the weeks leading up to the 2026 session. According to Speaker Perez, the intent was to give voters a menu of options. His position was that the House did not need to limit itself to a single plan, and should instead allow the people of Florida the ability to choose some, all, or none of the proposals on the 2026 ballot. Here is what each proposal would do. House Joint Resolution 201 is the most far-reaching. Sponsored by Representative Kevin Steele, it would eliminate all non-school property taxes on homesteaded properties immediately upon taking effect. Under this proposal, homeowners with a primary residence would no longer pay property taxes to counties, cities, special districts, or water management districts. They would continue to pay only the school district portion of their property tax bill. The Florida Revenue Estimating Conference determined that HJR 201 would reduce local government revenue, excluding school districts, by $18.3 billion annually. That figure represents roughly 1/3 of the total $55 billion in property taxes collected statewide in 2024, according to a Florida Chamber of Commerce report. The proposal includes a provision prohibiting local governments from reducing their total funding for law enforcement below the level of either fiscal year 2025-2026 or 2026-2027, whichever is higher. House Joint Resolution 203 takes a phased approach. Instead of eliminating non-school homestead taxes immediately, it would increase the homestead exemption by approximately $100,000 each year, until non-school homestead taxes are effectively eliminated over a 10-year period ending in 2037. This proposal cleared the House State Affairs Committee on January 23, 2026, in an 11-5 vote. It has since cleared its final committee and is heading to the full Senate floor. House Joint Resolution 205, sponsored by Representative Juan Carlos Porras of Miami, targets seniors specifically. It would eliminate all non-school property taxes on homesteaded properties for owners aged 65 and older. The Revenue Estimating Conference estimated this would cost local governments $6.7 billion annually. This proposal reflects the reality that approximately 30% of Florida property owners aged 65 and older spend more than 30% of their income on housing costs, according to data from the Schimberg Center for Housing Studies at the University of Florida. House Joint Resolution 209, sponsored by Representative Demi Busada Cabrera of Miami-Dade County, takes a different approach entirely. It creates an additional $100,000 homestead exemption against non-school taxes, but only for homeowners who maintain a comprehensive multi-peril property insurance policy. The original exemption range of $25,000 to $75,000 would be extended to $25,000 to $200,000. This proposal links property tax relief directly to property insurance coverage, a significant issue in Florida where insurance costs have become a major affordability concern. HJR 209 passed the House Ways and Means Committee in a 10-5 vote and is positioned for a floor vote. House Joint Resolution 211, sponsored by Representative Toby Overdorf, addresses the Save Our Homes portability cap. Under current Florida law, when homeowners sell their primary residence and purchase a new one, they can transfer up to $500,000 of their accumulated Save Our Homes benefit to the new property. HJR 211 would remove that $500,000 cap for non-school tax levies, allowing homeowners to transfer the full value of their accumulated benefit. Portability related to school taxes would remain capped. House Joint Resolution 213, sponsored by Representative Griff Griffiths of Bay County, would fundamentally change how property values are assessed. Instead of annual assessments, it proposes switching to triennial assessments for non-school taxes. Homestead property value increases would be capped at 3% over each 3-year period, rather than the current 3% per year. Non-homestead properties would be capped at 15% over 3 years, instead of the current 10% per year. This effectively cuts the allowable growth rate by roughly 2/3 for homestead properties. HJR 213 was approved by the House Ways and Means Committee in a 10-4 vote on January 23, 2026, and is now heading to the full House. On the Senate side, Democratic Senator Mac Bernard of Palm Beach County filed 4 of his own proposed amendments. Senate Joint Resolution 270 creates additional non-school exemptions for homeowners aged 65 and older who meet income and residency requirements. SJR 274 proposes a loyalty-based system where homeowners who have owned and resided in their homestead for 20 years would see their assessed value frozen, and those who reach 30 years would receive an additional exemption equal to 50% of the assessed value. SJR 278 targets new homebuyers by limiting reassessment spikes for newly acquired properties under a qualifying value. SJR 282 extends cap-like protections to small business commercial properties, limiting annual assessment increases to 3%, or the Consumer Price Index, whichever is lower. As of February 11, 2026, according to reporting from Axios Tampa Bay, 3 House proposals have cleared all committee stops and are heading to the full House floor. HJR 203, HJR 209, and HJR 213 are all positioned for floor votes. However, none of these proposals has a counterpart in the Senate. If any of them pass the House, they would go to the Senate, which could take them up and assign them to committees or let them die. This is where the political conflict becomes critical. 3 separate power centers in Tallahassee are pulling in different directions. Governor DeSantis has repeatedly criticized the House approach. He dismissed the package as not serious and described the individual proposals as milquetoast and half measures. His core argument is strategic. He believes that putting multiple proposals on the November 2026 ballot would confuse voters and split support, preventing any single amendment from reaching the 60% threshold required for passage. DeSantis has insisted that a single, clearly written amendment is the only viable path to passage. He has also suggested that the House proposals are intentionally designed to fail. Speaker Perez responded by noting that DeSantis had not produced a detailed plan of his own, despite months of public advocacy. In a statement, Perez said the governor's comments could only be interpreted in 2 ways. Either he was being small and petty, or he was signaling that he intends to propose eliminating all property taxes, including school taxes. Perez noted that eliminating school property taxes would require making up approximately $21 billion in education funding. Senate President Albritton has taken a more cautious position. He has said he is open to addressing property tax relief, but has emphasized that substance is more important than timing. Albritton represents a rural district and has expressed concern about the potential impact on rural communities that lack alternative revenue sources. The Senate has not advanced any of the House proposals and has not released its own competing plan during the regular session. DeSantis has suggested that a separate special session later in the spring may be necessary to resolve the property tax question, but no such session has been formally announced for this purpose. An April special session has been called for congressional redistricting. The budget battle adds another layer of complexity. On February 13, 2026, just 2 days ago, the House released its proposed budget for the 2026-2027 fiscal year, totaling $113.58 billion, nearly $1 billion less than the current budget. The Senate delayed its own budget release, with Senate Appropriations Chairman Ed Hooper saying the Senate spending plan would not be unveiled until the following week at the earliest. This mirrors the tensions from the 2025 session, when a dispute between Perez and Albritton over tax cuts led to an additional 45 days of session before a compromise was reached. DeSantis was at the center of that disagreement as well, having preferred a large property tax cut while opposing the House plan to reduce the state sales tax from 6% to 5.25%. The fiscal reality of these proposals is significant. Florida collected approximately $55 billion in total property taxes in 2024. Of that amount, counties received $19.6 billion, cities received $8.6 billion, and school districts, independent special districts, and municipal service taxing units collected the remainder. According to the Florida Revenue Estimating Conference and the Florida Policy Institute, 36% of statewide property tax revenue comes from primary residences. Eliminating homestead property taxes would cost approximately $18.5 billion across counties, cities, and school districts combined. A Florida Policy Institute analysis found that replacing this revenue through increased sales taxes would require roughly doubling the state sales tax rate from 6% to approximately 12%. Local discretionary sales surtaxes, even if collected at maximum rates statewide, would generate only about $13.2 billion, enough to cover roughly a third of lost property tax revenue. Local government officials have responded with alarm. The Florida League of Cities commissioned a study from Wichita State University that found property taxes account for approximately 43% of municipal general revenue across all Florida cities. Public safety spending alone consumes more than 56% of municipal general fund dollars statewide. In small cities with fewer than 5,000 residents, annual spending on police and fire services equals about 90% of yearly property tax collections. Mid-sized cities spend 150 to 175% of their property tax revenue on public safety. Large cities with more than 100,000 residents spend about 140%. These figures mean that even modest property tax reductions could force cuts to services or fee increases. The Florida Association of Counties has warned that in some rural counties, there may not be enough remaining revenue to protect even law enforcement budgets after homestead exemptions are applied. The Florida Fire Chiefs Association has raised particular concerns. During House committee hearings, Association President Tripp Barrs stated that without safeguards in place, any reduction of revenue will disproportionately impact the emergency services that protect life and property. While several proposals include provisions to protect law enforcement funding, firefighters and emergency medical services are not uniformly protected across all proposals. Representative Angie Nixon of Jacksonville warned during a December committee meeting that holding only law enforcement harmless could result in local governments imposing usage fees for fire or emergency medical services. Chief Financial Officer Blaise Ingoglia has countered these concerns by arguing that local governments are overtaxing and overspending. He has claimed that local budgets could be cut by approximately 15% without affecting essential services. Ingoglia has accused local governments of collectively overspending more than $1.8 billion in revenue. In Palm Beach County, for example, he accused local officials of overspending $344 million in 2025 and said his proposed cuts would save the average homeowner with a property assessed at $600,000, approximately $331 per year. Former Republican state legislator Jeff Brandes, who now heads the Florida Policy Project, has described the overall approach as policy malpractice. During a November 2025 debate at the University of South Florida, Brandes raised the question of what comes after property tax elimination, asking whether the plan means cutting police and firefighters or doubling the sales tax. He also warned that cities and counties may respond by increasing their millage rates on renters and commercial property owners, since most counties are not currently at the maximum allowed rate. This could shift the financial burden onto renters and small business owners, who would not benefit from homestead exemptions. There is also a political dimension that extends beyond fiscal policy. DeSantis has cautioned against advancing any property tax reform that would attract transplants from high-tax states who could change the composition of Florida's electorate. PolitiFact rated DeSantis's claim that most Florida property tax dollars come from vacation homes and businesses as mostly true, noting that 64% of property tax revenue comes from non-primary residences. However, they also noted that eliminating homestead property taxes could still cost $18.5 billion and might result in reduced services, privatization, or increased sales or corporate tax rates. The timeline ahead is compressed. The regular legislative session runs from January 13 to March 13, 2026. Any constitutional amendment must pass both the House and Senate with a 3/5 supermajority to appear on the November 2026 ballot, where it would then need 60% voter approval to take effect. With only about 4 weeks remaining in the regular session, and the Senate having not advanced any property tax proposals, the window for action is narrowing. DeSantis has suggested that a special session may be needed, but has not formally called one for property taxes. This situation remains fluid. The House has positioned at least 3 proposals for floor votes. The Senate has not committed to a timeline or a preferred approach. The governor continues to push for a single bold amendment, but has not released specific legislative language. Local governments are actively lobbying against the most aggressive proposals, and the budget fight between the House and Senate adds further uncertainty to whether any property tax amendment will reach the ballot in November 2026. For Florida's 5.1 million homesteaded property owners, the potential impact ranges from modest savings to the elimination of 55 to 60% of their property tax bill, depending on which proposal, if any, ultimately passes. For renters, who would not directly benefit from homestead exemptions, the concern is whether the lost revenue would lead to higher fees, reduced services, or increased costs passed through by landlords and commercial property owners. For local governments, the question is whether they can maintain essential services including police, fire, emergency medical response, infrastructure, parks, and libraries with dramatically reduced revenue. To understand the scale of what is being proposed, consider how property taxes currently work for a typical Florida homeowner. A homeowner with a property assessed at $400,000 and a homestead exemption currently pays roughly $5,000 to $7,000 per year in total property taxes, depending on the county. Of that amount, approximately 40 to 45% goes to school districts, and the remaining 55 to 60% goes to counties, cities, and special districts. Under HJR 201, that homeowner would see the non-school portion eliminated entirely, saving them roughly $2,750 to $4,200 per year. Under HJR 209, the additional $100,000 exemption for insured homeowners would produce a more modest but still meaningful reduction. Under HJR 213, the savings would come gradually through slower assessment growth rather than an immediate tax cut. For homeowners in high-cost counties like Miami-Dade, Broward, Hillsborough, and Orange, the savings would be proportionally larger because millage rates are higher. For homeowners in rural counties with lower property values and millage rates, the dollar savings would be smaller, but potentially more significant relative to household income. the Revenue Estimating Conference has published county-by-county impact analyses available on the Office of Economic and Demographic Research website. It is worth noting that Florida has a history of property tax reform. The Save Our Homes Amendment, approved by voters in 1992, capped annual increases in the assessed value of homesteaded properties at 3%, or the Consumer Price Index, whichever is lower. In 2008, voters approved Amendment 1, which doubled the homestead exemption to $50,000 and created portability, allowing homeowners to transfer their Save Our Homes benefit when moving to a new primary residence. Both measures passed with strong voter support. However, both measures also reduced local government revenue and required adjustments to municipal budgets. The current proposals are significantly larger in scope than any previous reform. The constitutional amendment process itself presents procedural challenges. To appear on the November 2026 ballot, a joint resolution must pass both the House and Senate with a 3/5 vote in each chamber. In the 120-member House, that means at least 72 votes. In the 40-member Senate, that means at least 24 votes. If the resolution reaches the ballot, it must then receive 60% voter approval to become law. The high thresholds at every stage mean that even popular proposals can fail if political disagreements prevent legislative consensus. Further developments are expected as the legislative session approaches its final weeks. The outcome of this debate will shape Florida's fiscal landscape for years to come and could set a precedent as the most significant property tax overhaul in the state's modern history. This video presents fact-based information and context. It does not provide advice or endorsements.